Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and Mega Man X Timelines Issue 1 came out this past Wednesday, so once again, I'm doing another review and breakdown. Also, once again, I'll be slowly escalating how spoiler-heavy things get, so pay attention to those chapter timestamps in the description if you haven't gotten around to grabbing your copy and don't want me to blow the lid off this one. I'll also mention that X has already been greenlit for an ongoing series, so this is just the start for what's in store. Let's see if that's warranted. The issue is written by Daniel Arsenault and drawn by Edwin Huang, with Josh Perez on colors and lettering by Marshall Dillon. We got another 13 covers, but those can wait for another day. I'll just discuss the standard one, since that's done by the main artist. We got another boss select, X standing in front, Buster ready. The weird thing about this is, each of the enemies here are drawn as their redesigns for Maverick Hunter X, but the one that shows up in the actual pages appears to be in his original Super Nintendo design. I'd heard that cover A was meant to be the most indicative of the inside contents, so I'm curious as to why they do things this way. Did they maybe plan to use the updated designs but then change their minds partway through the process, or did they just want both versions represented? Either way, the art in the book is fine. There's a lot of variety in the characters' expressions, as well as details in the environments. I imagine that the artist was staring at the game an awful lot while coming up with his panels. Everything is also really shiny. And I mean, yeah, these are robots made of metal, so that does make some amount of sense, but enemies and obstacles look like they were rolled right off the assembly line, and X like he just came out of the bath. If you're looking for any wear and tear, or just a grittier feel, I wouldn't really describe the images here that way. And while I will compliment this really sexy shot of Zero, the book looks exactly like I'd expect from a Mega Man X comic. I'd say it's more faithful than stylized, which, whether that's a plus or minus, will depend on who you ask. Moving on to the back of the book, we have an ad for the Shantae Swimsuit Special 2025. Nice. Gotta remember to add a copy of that and maybe a variant when I place my order for the next set of timeline issues. What? It's a platformer, it's on brand. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, X. There's another page announcing a full series for X launching fall 2025, with the same author, Daniel Arsenault, but a swap in artist to Hanzo Steinbach. X looks good in the image provided, though that's a pretty small sample, but Steinbach is queued up to do the art for Mega Man Zero timelines, so I'll have a better idea of his style when that drops. Though if I can bring up something that does kinda cheese me off, it'd be the numbering. This month was Mega Man X Timelines Issue 1, and at some point we'll get Mega Man X Issue 1, and a prequel, Issue 0, which the reading order for is Issue 0, Timelines 1, then Issue 1. I did have a much harsher rant typed up for this, but remembering that the author was replying to tweets, I decided to ask about it before I went full crazy person and got this response back. And I mean, I kinda get it, and I do appreciate the quick response. Was it rude of me not to at least send a thank you back? It's a good way to show that you're listening to the community, but I still kinda hate it. I think that it's needlessly confusing, and you're gonna get a few people who aren't paying attention that'll pick up Mega Man X1 and wonder why it feels like they're missing an issue, and others that see X1 and think that they already have it. Also, as someone who organizes their comics by publisher, then alphabetical, it bugs me that I'll have just one book thrown behind all the rest despite taking place second, and will feel dumb when I have to explain this if anyone wants to borrow them. Or maybe I just have too little faith in people, but hey, at least you, dear viewer, will not experience any of these pratfalls, since I've just laid things out and hopefully plenty of other interested parties see the tweets. Let's move on to the story, which I am now going to sum up in one sentence. It's just a run of Chill Penguin stage. Sure, there's a few tweaks made and some details filled in, but for the most part, if you've ever seen this screen before, you know 90% of what's here. I'd say it's the bare minimum I was expecting, but with as much personality as last month's classic issue brought to the characters, I was kind of hoping for a bit more. And yeah, I did say that I liked faithful adaptations, but this still feels a little too safe. The main chunks of text are X questioning his purpose, setting up the basic premise, Dr. Light's capsule, and Chill Penguin going over why he's a butthole. With Mega Man X being my favorite game, me reading a bunch of supplemental material on my own, and having done plenty of runs of the Maverick Hunter remake, I feel like there's very little here that I haven't already read, albeit phrased a bit differently. It feels like I get about as much out of doing a run through the stage in Maverick Hunter, though again, this is something that I'm more familiar with than the average person, and while it was still pretty minimal in the beginning, X always did have more story than Classic, meaning less blanks to fill in, so I might just be more easy to impress when it comes to an adaptation of 11 than I am of X. For someone who's never played the game or just hasn't touched it in a while, this probably will be a satisfying read, but for those who play X obsessively, this might feel a little underwhelming. Swinging back to the recommended reading order, it seems issue 0 of the main series will be the Highway stage, and 1 will be Storm Eagle, which does match up with how Timelines is structured, so points for consistency. Okay, summary time, so skip ahead if you don't want the big spoilers. It starts out with X questioning his existence, before Zero interrupts him and calls him into the briefing room. While giving a quick mention of Vile and Sigma, they're told that they've received a distress signal from the polar base where Chill Penguin's meant to be stationed, though they've lost contact with the Reploid. X and Zero head out, them quickly splitting up to cover more ground. After fighting through a few rogue mechanoloids, X finds a room with a capsule and a recording that explains that they believe that it was created by Dr. Light, but they can't seem to get it working to confirm. It starts right up though when X approaches it, and we get a speech from Hologram Light before X steps inside to get the foot parts, which he then uses to dash through the rest of the level, pretty effortlessly. He then enters a room where he sees some other Reploids frozen solid. After demanding that the perpetrator come forward, Chill Penguin jumps down, tells X this was all a trap, and explains why he joined Sigma. Then they fight. Penguin gets in some hits, well, 1 hit after freezing him in place, so that's kinda like 2, but after attacking with a snowstorm, he loses track of X, who manages to sneak up behind him and take him out. Zero shows up as X is downloading his shotgun ice, during the process finding out that Storm Eagle is also somehow involved, and after some words of wisdom from Zero, the two head out. Just about every game ends with X asking the Skyline why he has to fight, so while him starting out questioning whether he's Sword or Shield doesn't really feel all that new, throwing it in right at the start, front and center, isn't a bad way to get any new to the series familiar with his whole existential deal. Page 2, we get a pretty big shot of Zero wearing his rounded shoulders, like he's supposed to in X1. And when we get to the command center, not only do we get a name drop for Able City, but we also see the unnamed navigator from Maverick Hunter X. Your knee-jerk reaction here might be to assume that this is an adaptation of that game, but just because neither of these appeared or were mentioned in the original SNES title, doesn't make them incompatible. It'd be like how we never see any humans in the X series outside of Dr. Kane, yet just because we don't doesn't mean that they don't exist. Does that make sense? Chill Penguin sporting his original design, and there's a few monitors showing some of the other bosses which, it's a little hard to tell because of how small they are, also seem to be their original iterations. And while they don't outright say whether Dr. Kane is alive, they don't mention him being dead or seem depressed when talking about him, so I'm saying this is a Mega Man X, not a Maverick Hunter X story. Also, we're starting with Chill Penguin for the foot parts, not Flame Mammoth. Anyway, Zero comes along with X here, which, in the original game, Zero's supposed to be out scouting for Sigma's base, so this is an obvious ploy to not only use probably the most popular character in the series to help sell issues, but also establish the pair's relationship, especially since they skip the highway. And you know what? I don't hate it. Anyway, the pair tackling challenges together would make things a bit too easy, so of course they split up. X takes some damage from the stage enemies and seems to be having some trouble, so while I could say that this means that I'm better at being X than X is, this does highlight how inexperienced he still is. I'm sure he'd have slicker moves if this was his dozenth time through the area. I also appreciate how there's a few panels viewed from the side that are pretty accurate depictions of some of the screens from the game, like when you have to wall jump up to the higher levels in the cave. Getting into the research station, he pushes a button to get a recording of another Reploid that talks about the capsule that they found, and there's a few things to discuss here. The Reploid in the video just kind of looks like a recolor of X, with a transparent visor over his eyes and a coat. There were a few others that looked pretty similar to X back on page 2 as well. This isn't anything too crazy, Reploids were based off of X's specs, and as we've seen in game, some just look a little closer to him than others. Still, looking at this guy, I feel like I've seen him somewhere before, which might just be his X-like design and me also thinking of Medi's green armor and Gates' lab coat, but I swear, someone's gonna tell me about how he's actually based off of this obscure character that everyone forgets about. Really thinking about it though, the color scheme and visor actually remind me of Captain N's rendition of Mega Man. Or maybe the greener monitor X is watching all this on is just making me see things. Moving on, there's some actual logic provided for why the capsule is coincidentally here, other than just game design. I guess before, if you needed a narrative reason, you could retroactively attribute it to Hologram Light, who showed some autonomy in later games, moving them to where X needed to go. Here though, when they first arrive, Zero mentions how Dr. Kane brought an excavation team to the old missile base, and Chill Penguin's unit was assigned to watch over things. Given his fascination with Dr. Light, it makes sense that Kane would be seeking out his work, and since Sigma recruited quite a few hunters and the area did have military value, a Maverick and upgrade both being here really isn't that much of a stretch. Also interesting that while the capsule wouldn't activate for the researchers, given that Hololight does appear to speak with Zero in later entries, it does imply that that's more of a choice than something specifically keyed to X, going back to that whole autonomy thing I mentioned before. Then we get the whole speech from Light that seems to temporarily quell X's doubts, which, I'll be honest, I did go back and watch parts of my playthrough of both the original and the remake to make sure that it wasn't pulled right from the games. I guess that does mean that it feels authentic, though again, it doesn't leave me feeling like I'm getting anything new. When X gets to the boss room, he finds the frozen Reploids, and when he confronts Chill Penguin, he's told how this was a trap to get rid of him and Zero, since they were considered threats, how Penguin joined the Maverick side because he was bored, and how they plan on using the missile silos to create an avalanche, all of which is lore accurate. Well, I guess you could say with how he seems to be looking forward to the screams of his victims, he comes across as a little more sadistic, though given that this is a guy who betrayed his teammates because, again, boredom, it still fits. The fight's pretty quick, 4 pages, though it shows off Chill Penguin's moves, and once again, X's inexperience. I also find it interesting how X apologizes before blasting Penguin, even though he's shown himself to be an irredeemable scoundrel. Though that is X, he's a pacifist, and whenever they do give him dialogue for a boss, there's a fair chance that he'll be trying to talk them out of fighting. When Zero shows up, X mentions how Sigma wasn't the only one to betray the Maverick Hunters, which, when combined with the whole trap thing, demonstrates just how in the dark they are in all of this. While Zero did seem to think that there was some connection to Sigma in the beginning, which shook X up a bit, when he confronts Chill Penguin, he asks him what happens and seems in disbelief when he reveals that he's betrayed them. So it's clear that X is still coming to terms with everything that's happening. While there's some of that in Day of Sigma, the games just show you 8 bosses and say, have at it. You pretty much know what you're in for when you march through the boss door. I'd say that this angle of X slowly learning just how bad the situation is, and just how many of his friends and allies have switched sides, is the most interesting aspect of the book, and I hope they continue to hit on it. Back to the story at hand though, X being able to copy Penguin's call history is an interesting tidbit, as is how Storm Eagle is set up to be the next opponent. That kinda makes it seem like the comic might follow an upgrade order rather than boss order, the latter of which was what the Archie comics just about always used. Then again, maybe after claiming the head parts, they'll break off to tackle Spark Mandrill or Flame Mammoth. Actually, wait, that second one would work for either. But I swear, if X makes that crazy jump to collect a heart tank, I will shit myself laughing. That might be going a bit too far with the whole Faithful thing. Anyway, despite Light's earlier motivational speech, X starts doubting his decision again, so you can probably guess that this will be a recurring thing. Zero does give some encouragement, but I wouldn't say it's the most sensitive, but it does maintain his cool vibe, so I liked his lines. After they leave, a Met runs in to stare at Chill Penguin's corpse and... is that the Met from the previous issue? I initially thought this might be either a cameo to include some kind of mascot character, or maybe retrieve the body for the eventual boss rematch, maybe through a forced teleport. I was a little confused about the odd coloration though, wondering if it maybe got partially iced over. Then I remembered the Met that Mega Man spared and patched its helmet during his fight with Blast Man. And I do recall hearing that each of the Timelines books would have something connecting them, but I wouldn't have guessed this. The patched Met doesn't really do anything here, so I wonder if it'll have any plot relevance, or if it'll just kinda be something that shows up. Might not have been too far off with the whole mascot thing. Also, there's no Mets in Legends. Will he pop up anyway, or get converted into a Cerbot? Well, regardless, I guess look forward to more of the little guy and get speculating on what they'll do with him. I'm kinda mixed on Mega Man X Timelines. For people wanting more X content or just a fun comic, I think this'll do it. If you're looking for a unique take on the story that makes you rethink the original game, well, you're not gonna find much of that here. The word of the day is faithful, and while we ain't talking religion, with how closely this follows the base material, it almost feels like it. The bad part is, I don't even think I'd mind all that much if Mega Man timelines hadn't raised my expectations. I actually got emotional reading that one, almost to tears, whereas this, I was kinda disappointed my first time through. I picked up more details on rereads, but compared with the reimagining they did of 11 and, from what I understand, an original story taking place between 01 and 02 that we're getting next, just a run-through Chill Penguin stage feels a little basic. I feel weird saying that, since I don't think this comic was bad. Any new Mega Man content that isn't predatory is a good thing, and I want to see all the Timelines books succeed, though you could argue this one already has, but I'm still not super impressed here. I am hoping to get some discussions going, since I'm desperate to know whether this is just a me thing, since I can sometimes have pretty high standards for narrative. So I guess it's time to ask, did you pick this one up? If so, what did you think? If not, are you interested in doing so? And which of the upcoming releases are you most looking forward to? Also, if you happen to read everything so far, which was your favorite? Classic, X, or free comic book day offering? That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. What am I uploading for?